السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. في عام 1997 اجتمعت النساء من جميع أنحاء الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية ومن أماكن بعيدة مثل زيمبابوي وجنوب أفريقيا في إحدى الساحات في مدينة فيلادلفيا فيما عرف بمسيرة المليون امرأة، والتي كانت مهمتها أن تكون النساء الأمريكيات من أصول أفريقية غير مهمشات، وهدفهن المساعدة في تحقيق التنمية الاجتماعية والاقتصادية وتحفيز وتعبئة وتمكين النساء والفتيات المنحدرات من أصل أفريقي في جميع أنحاء الشتات بغض النظر عن الجنسية والدين أو الوضع الاقتصادي. ومذ ذاك أضحت هذه المسيرة منصة انطلاق لتطوير أول حركة عالمية للنساء والفتيات المنحدرات من أصل أفريقي في العالم، وبذلك تعد مسيرة المليون امرأة التاريخية لعام 1997 أكبر تجمع نسوي في العالم، وهي الآن تتصاعد وتنمو باعتبارها أكثر من مجرد منظمة، بل هي أمة تبني قوة استباقية وكيانا محققا لذاته. صاحبة الرؤية ومهندسة هذه المسيرة التي قامت بصياغة أيديولوجية مسيرة المليون امرأة وفلسفتها ومنهجيتها هي المربية والكاتبة والفنانة والموسيقية امبريس، التي ولمدة 23 عاما متتالية تابعت وثابرت في طريق تقرير المصير، حتى باتت هذه الحركة الماس الخام لحركات عالمية. يطيب لنا أن نستقبل من مدينة فيلادلفيا الدكتور امبريس لتحدثنا عن الظروف التي أدت إلى هذه الخطوة العملاقة وأهم موضوعاتها وطبيعتها، وما الرسائل التي تردد صداها من خلال هذه المسيرة المليونية. أهلا بكم إلى هذه الحلقة من برنامج من الداخل، معكم زينب صفار، تابعونا. Dr. Empress Chi, the visionary architect and sole founder of the historic 1997 Million Women March and the President General of the first global movement for women and girls of African descent worldwide, welcome to Min al-Dakhil from the inside, ma'am.
And thank you. Good evening to you.
Good evening, ma'am. Pure pleasure to have you. Well, an estimated 2.5 million African descendant women and girls from all walks of life and parts of the world pledged in October to unify in October, of course, 1997, to unify in an effort to restore their communities. Tell us more about the circumstances that led to this mammoth move, the Million Women March, and its major themes and nature, and consequently the messages that reverberated from this march.
Well, again, thank you for inviting me for this wonderful program. The historic Million Woman March was, of course, incredible, to say the least. In 1997, we did something that had never been done and hasn't been done since, as a matter of fact. The Million Woman March, again, as you mentioned, brought together more than 2.5 million women and girls of African descent from all walks of life. The theme was actually what we called the 3 R's. It was repentance, resurrection, and restoration. And so while our communities were, of course, very important to rebuild, given the fact that 400 years of experiencing what is often called global white supremacy, we knew firsthand of the effect, certainly it had on our community. And at that time, we were just coming out of a very critical time period, as we have for other time periods, but the epidemic known as crack cocaine had hit our communities in such a way that it not only devastated our families and our communities, but particularly the impact that it had on Black women was something that we had never seen before even with 400 years of being enslaved and coming out of that into another type of enslavement.
Right. Now, ma'am, for some, the October 25th, 1997 was just, for example, a march, a special event. But for millions worldwide, it was the beginning of the release of an unstoppable and unbeatable, uniquely powerful force that would positively impact and righteously change the course of things yet to come. How do you, Dr. Chi, remember it now after 23 years?
Oh my goodness. You know, again, it's been 23 years of continual work, continual struggle. Mm-hmm. And on that day, I knew then that it was just the beginning, and certainly has proven to be as such. What we experienced that day indicated that we were going to make a major difference, a major impact on the world. And so we did. A few years later, after the Million Woman March, women in Nigeria had a somewhat of a Million Woman March. They didn't have a million women, but it was the idea of Black women, of African women coming together. We inspired that. We inspired many of the other marches that came after the Million Woman March here in America. We helped to inspire that because even though there had been marches previously, needless to say, the March on Washington, the Million Man March, mm-hmm. and certainly others, the fact is we were the ones to do something in such a way that has to be noted. For example, all of the other marches that had large gatherings had recognized personalities, had corporate sponsoring or institutional sponsoring. We had none of that. Mm-hmm. We started from the grassroots. And I mean literally, mm-hmm. Women.
That's why it was that powerful, ma'am.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, I mean, literally, women were making pies, you know, selling jewelry that they made mm-hmm. in order for us to raise funds. Mm-hmm. We did obtain other funding. People made donations, but not corporations, not wealthy individuals. None of that.
Right.
So we were able to do something again that had not been done before, to bring 2 million people together and not have corporate sponsoring, not have a major benefactor, not be connected to a political known party, mm-hmm. none of that.
Right.
See, so we were able to speak in a way that had never been done before. It was independent then, it's independent now.
Great. Now, what about the International Million Women Movement, and how important is it to move the resistance in the struggle for Black justice?
Well, again, one of our themes, 2 years ago, almost 3 years ago, 2017, we commemorated the 20-year anniversary of the Million Woman March, and at that time made a declaration. And the declaration was to proceed with what we had begun 20 years ago at that time, and that was to build the first global movement for women and girls of African descent worldwide. Now, when we say Black, again, we are really talking about a political or a mental and spiritual kind of ideology or embracing. You see, because you have the Democratic Party, Republican Party, Green Party, all these parties, and they have their own agendas, they have their own philosophy, approach, and so forth. So when we say Black, when we say self-determination in those manners, we're talking about something that has a historical significance of our people, particularly in this land, but it does connect globally. For example, Stephen Biko. Mm-hmm. Stephen Biko was born in South Africa, i.e. Azania. But he oftentimes talked about what it was to be Black. So even though he was by birth South African, he knew the importance of understanding a concept, a thought process that what we call Black. And so again, what we did in 1997 was we set the foundation mm-hmm. for something that was going to really raise up the work of our ancestors. And again, not just ancestors here in the U.S., but mm-hmm. ancestors globally throughout the diaspora. And by the way, I want to mention, before I go any further, again, our sincere prayers and thoughts and condolences to those who have lost their lives at this time as a result of war, as a result of hatred, as a result of the COVID-19. We want, again, for our women to know what a powerful force we are in this time to help bring about the types of necessary resolutions that we must do, which is obviously in our midst.
Bless your heart, ma'am. Before I go into a break, Dr. Chi, allow me to ask you about this initiative and this march and this movement has been an inspiration, a beacon for other women in various countries who are suffering under the burden of corruption, violence, and racist practices. Why only women and girls?
Well, I've been studying for quite a few years in different areas, law, religion, anything that's applicable to real freedom, real justice. And so I really like physics, and in fact, I relax when I'm reading physics because I tend to be in so many different types of activities and they tend to, be a little wearing at times. Mm-hmm. So I read physics as a way of just kind of cooling out. Well, of course, when you talk about physics, you will oftentimes, needless to say, run across, someone that most recognize, and that is Albert Einstein. Mm-hmm. Albert Einstein had said something to the effect of what a definition of insanity is. And he said that insanity, and I'm paraphrasing, he said, insanity is when you keep doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. Mm-hmm. So, with that said, if we have looked at the world and what it has now become, and we see where it's going, or at least we get some indication, I dare say women were not a part of that. So, if women were not really a major part of what you're seeing today, which is corruption, which is war, which is violence, which is all kinds of things that are detrimental to humanity, then perhaps women and girls will be the solution, because they certainly weren't a part of the actual problem.
Sure.
You see. Mm-hmm. So again, going back to what Einstein said, you can't keep doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. Women have never been, at least not in time that we know of, in a position of real capability to assert a real type of concept power or what have you.
Very good. Allow us, Dr. Chi, to stop now for a short break, and then afterwards we're going to focus more on your insights on this struggle of the African American women. But after the break, إذن فاصل قصير ونعود. لا تذهبوا بعيدا. أهلا بكم من جديد. Dr. Empress Chi, the visionary architect and sole founder of the historic 1997 Million Women March. Welcome back to من الداخل, ma'am. Allow me here, Dr. Empress, to ask you about the We Chart Genocide 21 project. It's one of the many projects that you are spearheading. What does it focus on and attempt to achieve?
Well, if I may, let me give you a little history, or her story.
Yes.
Well, the We Chart Genocide is greatly inspired, of course, because of 400 years. In 1951, the great Paul Robeson, along with William Patterson, both lawyers, by the way, they started something in 1951. Now, there was no internet, faxing, well, it may have been faxing, but not to any great degree. But the point is, there was no real way to compile data, information, and so forth yet.
There was no Google.
Right, exactly. No Facebook, none of that. So, but Paul Robeson and William Patterson took on something that was just so inspiring. They documented hundreds of murders, lynchings, mob beatings, police attacks, all kinds of things. They literally documented this, names, dates, all of that, and formulated it and took it to the United Nations in 1951. and it was called We Charge Genocide. Now, their particular focus was, in fact, police and governmental terrorism, the Ku Klux Klan, mob beatings, etc. But that was such a powerful initiative that they did. They, of course, ended up being whiteballed years after. Paul Robeson's passport and other things began to be denied. He could not find work. But now, to fast forward, 1963, 64, Malcolm X. Malcolm X began to go into Africa. He went to Egypt. He went to Ghana, Nigeria, because his platform, after really becoming more aware and more involved in not civil rights, but what he taught and declared was human rights. So in 1963, 64, he traveled to Africa to get the support from various African nations for the effort to fight for Black human rights here in America. And he knew that that was the way to go. We saw the civil rights movement, of course, Dr. King and others, but for Malcolm X and others, it had to now be moved forward into another manner. And so he began fighting for Black human rights. Well, we know, unfortunately, 1965, Malcolm X was murdered. But we're now, as women and what we call his children, we're now picking up that mantle of all of them. There was a woman by the name of Queen Mother Moore, who was a mentor to Malcolm X, who helped him to grow and develop as well. And she fought for reparations in the 1950s. So here we are in the 21st century. There's been no real substantial, qualitative, global work, at least that we've been able to find, that deals with the issue of human rights violations of people of African descent in the United States. Well, we saw that Million Woman March and its universal movements knew that we were primed, ready to pick up that mantle. And so we did. And so now we have something that we call We Charge Genocide 21. We're in the 21st century. We honor our ancestors, the work that they've done. A great woman by the name of Callie House. She started in the 1800s demanding ex-slave compensation. So we figure with 1 million Black women plus, 1 million more Black women, what can we do? And then to connect that to our community. So presently,
Yes, in asking such a question, why, Dr. Empress, do at least 50% of the American people, mostly Christians and conservatives, of course want President Trump to unleash the U.S. armed forces on the American people in the aftermath of the nationwide riots over the murder of George Floyd? Trump actually threatened to invoke the Insurrection Act and turn the U.S. military loose on the protesters and rioters. Is what we are witnessing a prelude to martial law?
It is, most certainly. And as a matter of fact, when we did the Million Woman March, we made certain that people understood that was what we were seeing in 97 was the beginning. Surely enough, 2000 came, and what did we see? We saw something called 911. Well, when 911 occurred, what then happened was Homeland Security and the Patriot Act. So that was really being put in place in 2001, to make certain that the overall plan of global white supremacy, but specifically in the U.S., would begin to go in place. So what we're seeing now is actually the next steps to what was put in place a few years ago. So again, this was known, we knew this was going to happen, not necessarily this per se, meaning a George Floyd and or a COVID situation, but we knew that ultimately this government would definitely kind of do a shift. And that shift had to be put in place based on conditions. So here we are in the midst of a pandemic. Well, what an excellent distraction And I don't want to, get sidetracked and make it seem like, oh, COVID was created in order to do this. No, but I'm saying to make certain that to take the advantage of that timing is one, to me, is very obvious. To see that people are in crisis, to see that people are preoccupied with just trying to survive. Certainly, that's a good time to be able to now implement a certain type of force. Sure. A certain type of presence, you see, because people are really trying to live, they're trying to survive. So now you can do certain things and it not get as much response, as much resistance, you see, as it would normally get. And we know that this is a reality because in the 1960s, people fought. I mean, we're seeing kind of remnants of it now. But in the 1960s, people fought like you can't even believe, which is why something like COINTELPRO came into existence and clearly said that it would make certain that there would never be another uprising like we saw in the 1960s.
Right. Well, it seems, Dr. Empress Chi, that COVID-19 is not the only pandemic hitting hard America today. It's racism, it's segregation, it's discrimination, racial injustice, and police brutality have always been societal pandemics across the US of A. Empress Chi, the visionary architect and sole founder of the momentous Million Women March and the President General of the first global movement for women and girls of African descent worldwide. We thank you and commend you for your insights, ma'am.
And thank you. And again, we encourage all of the peoples of the world of good consciousness, of justice, support the We Charge Genocide 21 campaign. We'll be telling you more about it. Hopefully I'll be coming with you again to let you know more how you can get involved, because everyone can support. And after 400 years, as it is just indicated, we're talking about brutality of all types, being hung, women, pregnant women being beaten. This is the history, the other history of the U.S.
Bless your heart. Bless your heart, ma'am. Bless your heart. والشكر لكم مشاهدينا الكرام على طيب المتابعة. للتفاعل أكثر تابعونا على صفحات السوشيال ميديا من كل فريق عمل من الداخل من كل الميادين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.